Hello and welcome to Consciousness Central, the daily program from Toward a Science of Consciousness Conference 2014 here in Tucson, Arizona. This is the 20th anniversary of the founding of this conference, and many of the people who were at the original conference and joined the conference over the years are here this year.
What's happened over the last 20 years is that I think there are two basic approaches. One is computation, that was there at the beginning, something that Roger sort of rebelled against, and I did too in a different way. That's championed by Christoph Koch and Giulio Tononi with Dan Dennett and John Searle and most other people in the field, that consciousness is a form of computation. You have sufficiently complex computation in the brain, add a dash of panpsychism, and that's consciousness. That's the approach that, believe it or not, is the most popular, the leading theory, even though it doesn't make any testable predictions and there's no evidence for it. It's just kind of, in my opinion, a sort of a hand-waving argument. And the other view is what Roger and I have developed with Anirban Bandyapati and Jack Tuczynski, Travis Craddock, a few other people, that the brain somehow uses quantum computing, a form of quantum computation involving Roger's objective reduction that connects us to the fine scale level of the universe.
When I wrote The Emperor's New Mind, I sort of thought that, well, I didn't know where you could have plausibly the kind of quantum coherent activity taking place which would make my ideas hold together. But I thought if I start writing the book and read things about brains and stuff, that I would find something out that would be at least a clue to this by the end of the book. I got to the end of the book and I didn't. So I had to stop the book at that point without having a satisfactory answer. So in a way I was only too grateful, well, of course I was grateful, to hear these ideas that Stuart had been working with. But I have to say that the first letter I got from you see, I get stacks. You're talking about all the papers.
Yeah,
many
sure.
of those are letters from people, I have to see, oh my God, you see.
Even crazier ideas.
Good deal, good heavens. Completely crazy ideas, which I would have to discard, okay. In amongst all these things, do you find something which is a clue to some truth? Well, here was an idea, and since I was so ignorant, I'd never heard of microtubules, I was a little skeptical at first, but then when I saw pictures of these things, I began to think, well, and look them up in a book, and microtube, there are such things, you see. So I think when I talked to you, I was more convinced that they did exist, but I didn't really know much about them at all. And they seem to be structures that look to me very plausibly structures which could support some kind of large-scale quantum activity. Largely, I think, because of the very symmetrical structures. And symmetrical structures are much better at quantum, preserving quantum through the symmetry. The symmetry can be an important factor. And the fact that there were tubes also meant that there might be things going on inside or around them in some ways that could be shielded from the kind of decoherence that, of course, everybody complains about when we put our scheme forward first, and still do, because it's very hard to keep things coherent. Quantum mechanically, the trouble is that the degrees of freedom get lost in the random environment. And it's a huge problem to construct or to imagine some kind of structure in which the degrees of freedom can be kept coherent. And so that quantum mechanics, some degrees of freedom in the system can be maintained to a high level as needed for the type of scheme I was groping for in my book, where you reach a level at which somehow quantum goes over to classical, and you need something beyond standard quantum mechanics.
Everybody talks about neuronal firings, that consciousness is due to axonal firings or neuronal firings. And that's only part of what the neuron does. And I think actually the consciousness is happening in the integration phase before you even get to firing. And the result of conscious processes or a form of computation due to objective reduction would then trigger firing or not trigger firing. And then the firing goes to the next synapse, and that tells you to move your arm or whatever. But I think that's just conveying the message. I think those who dwell strictly on the firing are missing the boat. I think consciousness has already happened. And actually EEG, which is the best marker of consciousness, correlate of consciousness, at least gamma synchrony EEG, actually measures what's happening in the dendrites and soma, not what's happening in the firings. So some of our, some of the other theories, Koch and Tononi, for example, focus, even though they talk about integration, they focus on firings. And I think that's a mistake. I think consciousness is happening in the dendrites and the soma, where, by the way, the microtubules are unique in all of biology. We tried to set gamma synchrony, which is euphemistically referred to as 40 hertz, 40 conscious moments per second, which is 25 milliseconds. So we needed t to be equal to 25 milliseconds, and then we could calculate how much E sub g, how many tubulins we needed for that. And 25 milliseconds, that's still a pretty long time in the quantum world. Now, when Anirban came along and showed, for example, megahertz vibrations, megahertz quantum resonances in microtubules, gigahertz, megahertz, and kilohertz, as slow as 10 kilohertz, meaning coherence times of 10,000th of a second, which is pretty long for quantum devices, but biological devices, but still too short for the gamma synchrony of 25 milliseconds. But in our more recent paper, as Roger described, we came up with a solution where the microtubules might be vibrating, having quantum resonances in the megahertz, for example, and their energies and frequencies would be slightly off, so they would interfere to give beat frequencies in the gamma range, in gamma synchrony. So the EEG might be beat frequencies of deeper level, higher frequency stuff going on, but that also meant that we only needed to avoid decoherence for 10 to the minus 4 seconds, and Anirban has already shown that. So for the criteria that we need has already been proven. So I claim that we have more evidence in support of our theory than any other theory has evidence for their theory.
So one of the proposals on the AI side is that at some point we'll be able to upload or download, whichever way, load one way or another, our consciousness into a computer, and we'll be preserved somehow. This, by the sound of it, is impossible. Is that true, or almost impossible to conceive of?
Well, it's impossible, according to my view, and certainly the view that we're proposing here. It would simply not be computation. I mean, if you just imitated everything you could on a computer, it wouldn't be conscious. It would just be, it might play chess even better than they do now, and all sorts of things. It might even play Go well. All sorts of things could be achieved, which we know can be achieved computationally, but perhaps with a greater power than we have at the moment, those things will eventually succumb. Even maybe quiz programs will be even better solved by computers, but that's not the point. I mean, we're asking about conscious beings, we're asking about understanding as a quality which I believe is crucially dependent on consciousness. Consciousness, without consciousness, you don't have understanding. I mean, clearly is the way computers are used today. The understanding is supplied outside. The computer does what it's told, maybe something very sophisticated, but make sure that the answers are things you believe, the understanding comes from the human being. And in my view, that depends upon consciousness. Now, the sort of model we're talking about here implies, if it's correct, that computers, no matter how powerful they are, will never achieve this.
Is your idea, could it be called reductionist or mechanistic, or is it something else? Do these words still mean anything? How do we understand?
Perhaps they're a bit out of date.
I don't know.
Yes.
It may be that they are. I mean, in a way, if you're saying, well, if we get enough microtubules and assemble them in a particular way, bing, to use your phrase, and that sounds a little bit mechanistic. It sounds like, well, we can reduce it just a bunch of microtubules behaving in a particular way.
Well, when you get down to the quantum level, as Roger showed in Emperor's New Mind, things become non-local, and everything, to some extent, is connected to everything. And so, yes, it's reductionism, but it's past the point of where most people stop. I mean, the reductionists, people who are termed reductionists, take the level of neurons and don't go any farther. They're not reductionist enough. If you go into the microtubules and into the quantum world, then you get non-locality, you get non-computability, a connection to intrinsic structure of the universe. So the reductionists don't reduce enough. And I think when you do that, everything kind of expands and you're in a whole other realm.
Today, I'm very pleased and honored to be here with the conference founder, co-founder Stuart Hameroff, and a special guest, philosopher Daniel Dennett. And we're going to get to grips with some problems, notably the famous, notorious hard problems. So first of all, Dan, for you, I gather this problem is not even a problem. It doesn't exist.
That's right. It's a cognitive illusion. It's easy to see why it's there, why people are taken in by it, but it just doesn't exist.
So can you elaborate on that? Why should it be so discussed and taken seriously, and at the same time, in a way, you're almost dismissing it entirely?
It's a very natural hunch to have. I call it the zombic hunch. And I can feel it as well as anybody. It sure seems like there's a show going on in my head, but there isn't. I can explain why there seems to be, but there isn't. And so we don't have to explain the show, and explaining the show, that's the hard problem. But if there isn't a show, then there's nothing of that sort that needs explaining. Consciousness is not a phenomenon that divides the universe in two, the things that have it and the things that don't.
Center of narrative gravity. Could you elaborate?
Yeah. The center of gravity, familiar simplification that physicists put to good use. You and I have a center of gravity. We also have a center of narrative gravity. There's you, Stu, there's me, Dan, and there's what we're conscious of. This is a simplification of all the complexity of what's going on in our brain. And it's basically what we can share with other people, what we can talk about. That's why I say it's a center of narrative gravity. It's the biography, the autobiography that is formed in us by our brains. We're not so much its authors as its heroes.
But who's we in all this? You say we. The center of narrative gravity is the we or the I?
Yes, it's the bearer, official bearer of the pronoun I.
But isn't that another term or for the hard problem or the self or consciousness?
Well, it's not that hard. It's because we have this useful theoretical fiction of a center of narrative gravity. We understand how it shapes the contents that are competing for influence in the brain, and we understand how, when you and I share notes on what it's like, or we're walking down the street and you see something strange and you say, "Did you see what I see?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And we then compare notes on what we saw. This is two centers of narrative gravity having a conversation about their shared experience.
Does a computer have a center of narrative gravity?
It could.
It could. In which case,
the computers haven't yet been made with this sort of architecture, but they could be.
We're talking about the science of consciousness.
Yes.
Can there ever be a science of consciousness?
Can there be? Yes, of course. I mean, and there's been tremendous amount of progress made in the last 20 years on everything, except, why does it feel like something to have a brain? So there's cognitive science, which is separating out, delineating all of the different capacities of information processing that takes place in the brain. And there's evolutionary biology that's giving us the explanation of the adaptive functions of these processes that take place in our brain. And there's affective and cognitive neuroscience explaining where in the brain these processes take place and what's going on there. And tremendous amount of progress is made on all of these questions, on all of these sciences. The only thing that's left out is, why does it feel like anything to have these brain processes in our brain? And there I don't see any progress being made at all. But that's okay. We can make a lot of progress on all different questions and never get any closer to that one. That's what I think has been going on.
My guest today is Anirban Bandyopadhyay. And Anirban is a senior scientist at the National Institute for Materials Science in Tsukuba, Japan, and is currently a visiting professor at MIT in the US. So Anirban, welcome. You do some very specific research in the field of quantum biology. Could you give us like an outline of what quantum biology is and what your research is about?
Yes, so conventionally, when we try to understand what quantum biology is, we expect that just like quantum, all the particles, all the biological material should be entangled, and if you switch on say one protein you switch on, the other protein automatically gets to the other state, if particular state is entangled. But this is not the case always. Though people always perceive this particular perspective as the original quantum biology, by quantum biology we want to mean that the potential distribution or the information is distributed fractionally among many different other elements. For an example, if I want to identify or understand a particular state of a protein molecule or any biological matter, there will be many of its environment we need to study simultaneously to get that one. So it means, suppose I have an electron and I have large number of proteins. If I add one electron, I will not find that electron in a particular protein. I will find a fraction of it in some protein, a fraction of that in other, a fraction of that in other places. So just like if soliton is the energy unit in a biological body, say our brain, our body, or in the trees, in the plants. So soliton is a key element or particle that is defining the information, then you cannot find it at one place. So you have to look at other places also to get that one. So it's a kind of a fuzzy kind of a concept, but this is all about quantum biology.
Baba Brinkman at the Towards the Science of Consciousness Conference, Tucson, Arizona. Check it out. A second ago, Dave Chalmers did the honors to initiate the conference. He sparked it off with a straight delineation of the main problem, the hard problem. How should I phrase it? It's a question that makes a powerful statement. Why do philosophers always have hair down to their waist, and what's the relationship between the length of their hair and the degree to which they separate consciousness from behavior and experience? Chalmers dropped an example avalanche from Leibniz Mill to Huxley with Aladdin's lamp. So why is the hard problem difficult? At the basics, it's because the easy problems have physical explanations. By definition, something that can't be explained physically is going to be pretty hard to explain scientifically. The easy problems are linked to mechanisms. For instance, it's an easy problem to explain my sense of rhythm, but the hard problem is what it feels like from the inside when I kick rhymes, and why is it a product of this mind? What is it like to be in a philosophical fistfight? Can science even possibly give us some insight? Well, according to Don Hoffman's bizarre concoctions, all physical reality is a perceptual construction with infinite conscious agents in a metaphysical conversation, constantly making reality manifest through observations. And in the face of this radical idealism with incomprehension spreading across the face of the people listening, Dan Dennett slapped his cards on the table like, what? Realism, shallow materialism can give us a deeper wisdom. He dropped the coffee machine theory of consciousness and the hard question. And then what happens? What's the consequence? Now, Dennett's coffee theory was great for caffeine addicts. That theory's gotta make it and pour it and drink it to be valid, which means the subject has gotta be partitioned. If the whole is smart, then the parts are simplistic. The panpsychics want to say consciousness is intrinsic, and Dan's answer is pan-niftyism. And really, what's the difference? The hard problem is mad popular, which means type A materialism faces a lot of work. And now Dave Chalmers is 50-50 on the fence between the two top theories, pending the evidence, divided down the middle like his soul is sliced. But I'm a flowing coalition of neuronal spikes in the global workspace. Dan Dennett's manners made a few consciousness junkies think he's a total jerkface. But hey, that's how a conference is gonna get its groove on. Precision is necessary to be precisely wrong. And if you stand on ceremony instead of science, then I say move on. This is Baba Brinkman, recording live from Tucson. Day one, we'll be back.